Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role playing games. This is the fourth play report for the ShadowDark game that I'm running for my regular gaming group. ShadowDark, of course, is the dark fantasy tabletop role playing game written by Kelsey Dion and published through her company, Arcane Library. So, when we last left our adventures, it was a little bit of a crisis point. The party had been separated from one of their number, Ursula, the half-orc fighter. Ursula had followed a bandit sentry into the wood, presumably heading ever closer to the bandit camp that they've been tracking for a couple of sessions now. And unfortunately, she fell to the bandits' attack. And the rest of the party was left wondering what had happened to her when she didn't return. And so they kind of made a desperate push into the forest to see if they can find her. They found the spot where she had fallen. They found that she had been dragged away. And as they started to follow, they were confronted by none other than the bandit captain or leader himself, Greaves Redthorn, who was a Knight of St. Idris, like our own Brother Bernard, and apparently one who had fallen away from the mission and the precepts of his order. And he is now leading this bandit group for some unknown reason. Unfortunately, when Greaves Redthorn emerged from the forest to confront the heroes, he had 11 wolves with him. And so the party, faced with such numbers, decided to stand down and accept his invitation to go to the bandit camp. Now, that's the recap. We're going to pick up there. I'm going to switch over to our Foundry page. Let me see. So that I can kind of illustrate a little bit some of the things that are happening. Hold on. That's almost right, but not quite. Let's see. There we go. All right. So here we are on our region map. With the tokens of the characters who are involved in this session. As you've noticed, this is for my regular gaming group. We play every Saturday, but our attendance is spotty. There are some people who can be very regular, and there are others who can only come in and out because life is complicated, right? So every session that we've played in so far in this campaign, you've seen a slightly rotating cast of characters, except for this time. This time we had the exact same group that we had before. I do want to say one thing that happened last session that I forgot to mention during the last play report, and that is that when the heroes fought the bandit sentries that ambushed them, and this was right before Ursula chased one of them deeper into the wood and had her unfortunate encounter with that one. But when they had fought the larger number of them and they had defeated them, there had been some injuries, and Gendry, our dwarf cleric who joined the party last session, played by my friend Adolfo, tried to make a cure light wounds for one of the characters, and he rolled a 1 on his roll. And consequently, and this was a healing attempt that he tried to do on Brother Bernard. When Brother Bernard returned after giving up on chasing after Ursula and the other bandit, and he returned to camp, Gendry tried healing Brother Bernard, and he rolled a 1. In ShadowDark, when you roll a 1, you lose the favor of your god for the casting of that spell, and you don't get it back until you make amends in some way. I also want to mention something else. In session number 2, Renwick noticed that Brother Bernard's eyes had flashed red when he was fighting the bandits as they encountered him then. Actually, it was in session 1, in the very first session. Renwick had noticed that aspect of Brother Bernard, which is Brother Bernard's, infernal connection rising up as he was fighting the bandits in the very first session, at the end of the very first session, because that's what the Knights of St. Yidris do, right? They channel infernal forces without succumbing to them. And that was a secret from the party. Renwick noticed it, and he had been questioning Brother Bernard about that that aspect. He strongly suspected that Brother Bernard was in some way connected to infernal forces. He was a little thrown off by that because Brother Bernard is also a worshiper of Ord, and wore an emblem of Ord. And Renwick, our wizard, is also a worshiper of Ord. Now, I didn't mention it in the following play reports. I just forgot. It was part of player interaction that happened throughout. But ever since Renwick noticed that, he'd been asking Brother Bernard to elaborate or to explain. And Brother Bernard kept parrying those attempts. The reason I wanted to mention all of that is because it played into Gendry's situation at the beginning of this, our 4th session. He begins without the ability to cast Cure Light or Cure Wounds. And we reasoned that maybe one of the reasons that Ord withheld it is because he tried to heal. Even if it was unbeknownst to him, he tried to heal a person that was channeling infernal energies. And Ord basically said, in order to atone for that, you're not going to be able to cast that spell again until you deal with the demonic presence that is imminent. And that was kind of like a revelation as we open this session and Gendry's walking with the rest of the party, surrounded by the wolves and all of that. He gets that kind of revelation in his mind from his God that those are the conditions, which tells him something, right? It tells him that something demonic is afoot, something they're heading into. There's something at play here in connection with Greaves that is demonic. So that's sort of a situation for a character. Let me talk a little more about the larger situation for the party. In the week or two that passed before I could run this 4th session, I'd been kind of thinking about the sloppiness with which I kind of combined a random encounter roll with Greaves Redthorn's presence and paired the two. And in the interest of wrapping up a game session, and I notice that this often happens to me at the very end of game sessions when I'm kind of like trying to just arrive at a good stopping point, that sometimes I put something together and say to be continued, and then I'm kind of like, either I feel like I need to unpack what I put together a little bit more, so I have to kind of like go back a little bit in time and almost replay that last session with a little bit more detail and a little bit more thought. Or I feel like I kind of make a mistake in terms of maybe authoring something too strongly for the sake of authoring it. I'm not sure how I felt about the end of the last session in terms of my decision to do that. I don't feel horrible about it. But what I did feel was like, oh my gosh, I kind of worked the characters into a situation that they didn't have much control over. I mean, 11 wolves and a dude with a great sword. Maybe they didn't have that much agency in terms of like following along. So I was determined not to let that persist. And I said, you know what? Let me, before we start play, set some conditions and some constraints on the situation that perhaps they can exploit, and let me slow it down and let me put this on a timetable and let's see what happens. So I basically said, okay, let me roll randomly to see how many rounds it would take for Redthorn to get from for Greaves Redthorn to get the party back to camp. So I rolled randomly for that. I don't remember the number I got, but I know that it was like something like, I don't know, it was like 6 or 7 or 8 rounds or something like that. Then I said, okay, he used a one-use magic item to summon these wolves and control them. Let me roll randomly to see how long he can hold on to that control. And I rolled randomly, and if I remember correctly, the number was a smaller number, right, than the number of rounds that they had to get back to the camp. Not by much. I think it was like 1 or 2 rounds short. So I figured, okay, Redthorn is going to get close to camp and maybe close enough that he can holler for some support from the bandits that are at the camp. But there's going to be a moment where these wolves are going to shift their behavior, and that might be an opportunity that the players might be able to kind of capitalize on. Right? And then I said, let me slow it down and go. We rolled an initiative, right, to talk about non-combat actions in terms of what the players the characters were doing as they were marching towards in the direction, towards the location that Greaves Redthorn wanted them to go in. And Renwick won initiative, our wizard, and I asked him, okay, so what are you doing? And he said, I'm interrogating Redthorn. I am just hurling questions at him constantly, trying to interrogate him. And I'm like, okay, well, Redthorn's going to basically kind of ignore what you're asking. He's not going to entertain any of your questions in any way. He's not going to respond at all. And he's like, yeah, okay, but, I'm just trying to basically get under his skin. And I said, okay. He's not going to get any information from Redthorn, but getting under his skin, all right, fair enough. We can work with that. So I had him roll a wisdom check, and I said, one of the things you notice about Redthorn is that he is ignoring you completely. It's not entirely because he thinks you're beneath him, although that might be part of it, but it's also because you can tell that he's moving with a purpose, and you see a bead of sweat start to appear in his brow. Because I think I also had Renwick kind of make a charisma roll versus Greaves Redthorn's charisma to see if he could get under his skin a little bit, right? And that might start to play with his concentration over the wolves. So, okay, we left that at that. Then I went to, I think it was Bernard that had the next thing, and he also was trying to talk to Greaves, but more as kind of like an equal and kind of like questioning, his allegiance to their oath and all of that. And Greaves started saying some fanatical stuff, kind of like, "Oh, you will come to understand, right? Like who really has power here? You'll see that our allegiance was misplaced once you've been able to see the truth and that sort of thing." And Bernard was kind of like offended by that and kind of coming back at him and stuff like that. And the others, right? Because aside from that, we had Gendry, and Gendry was just kind of focused on his revelation to his god. He didn't say he was doing anything particular. Asher was focused on the behavior of the wolves and trying to get a sense of whether or not they were behaving normally or not. And he was able to discern that they seemed, they were, I described how the wolves were almost like they were moving with too much purpose that didn't seem to be their own, and they were kind of like aggressive in their demeanor, but in a way that wasn't necessarily typical of wolves. Almost like they were herding, like brushing up against the characters and stuff to kind of like hurry them along or herd them. And, that there was something unnatural, but he didn't roll well enough to get much beyond that. But I said, there's something kind of unnatural about the way the wolves are behaving. And Rowena, our witch, was trying to see if she could befriend the wolves, to which there was really no chance of at this point. But I kept that in mind. So we continued in this way, and I figured that I would give we did one more round of this sort of like, as you're getting to camp, what are you doing? And I forget exactly what the shift was in the line of interaction, but Renwick said something or did something that merited a roll. Having noticed the bead of sweat on his brow, Renwick went for for basically like a social attack, essentially. And we had another contest of opposed rolls, and if I remember correctly, Renwick criticaled the roll, and Greaves rolled poorly, and that was enough for him to spin around in anger and kind of defend an entity that he was following, right? Like there was some accusation of pettiness or whatever, and he turned around and he was like incredulous that there could be a questioning of the power that was here. And when he did that, he lost control of the wolves, right? So the wolves broke their control. At that point, Rowena tried to at least befriend one of them. She didn't roll well enough, but so what I decided to do is roll a reaction roll. Actually, no, that's what happened. I just said I'm going to roll a reaction roll to see what these wolves do when they snap out of this control, right? Will they become hostile and attack the whole party? Will they become friendly? I decided that if I rolled a friendly result, the only wolf that would be friendly would be the one that Rowena had been trying to befriend, right? And that the others would have like a step down on the reaction table from that. But what I rolled, and the wolves ended up being suspicious. So I said, okay, if the wolves are suspicious, what are they going to do? They're going to flee. And so the wolves like growled at everybody and stuff. And then after a moment of considering whether to attack or not, they just fled the scene. And they were left. It was Greaves Redthorn left facing the rest of the party. And at this point, I think I'm going to put down, I mean, we're obviously not on a battle map, but I'm just going to kind of situationally kind of place the characters as they were. So this was Greaves's token. And we had a situation. Ursula was not in the picture. Let me remove her for now. Ursula was not in the picture. Gendry, I'm going to put off to the side for reasons, which I'll explain in a moment. And Renwick, Asher, and Rowena. Okay. So this was kind of the situation, roughly, something like that in terms of setup. So they ended up kind of facing each other. And at that point, after a moment of looking at each other like, what now? Bernard went to tackle Greaves. He missed. Greaves stepped to the side, swung his greatsword, and cut Bernard down. One blow, maximum damage, took him down. We rolled how many rounds Bernard would have to live, and he rolled a relatively high number. He had like 4 or 5 rounds, something like that. So he's going to have to start making death saves. Then we have next round. There's a magic missile that's fired at Greaves by Renwick, right? Greaves ran over and took a swing and took Renwick down, one blow. Asher fired an arrow that first round at Greaves. When he saw Renwick go down, he whipped out his mace, which he's much better at anyway, and he charged Greaves and entered him in hand-to-hand combat. He got a good blow in, did some significant damage, but not enough to take Greaves down. They traded blows for a couple of rounds. So Asher took, I think, One blow, then another blow from Greaves, and he went down. While they were trading blows, Rowena ran over to Renwick and was checking to see Renwick had like, I think it was like 1 round to live. So Rowena had run up to him, and while Asher and Greaves were trading blows, she ran over to him and she rolled a medical aid roll essentially to stabilize him. She failed. Um, Renwick, Jason, Renwick's player, had a luck token, right? That he had not used, and you can give those to other players to re-roll rolls. So pass the luck token to her. She made her roll with the second attempt and stabilized Renwick. But we have 2 party members down, and as I was describing the action between Greaves and Asher, I described the previous action as like, Greaves, who's pretty wounded at this point. He's taken, I think, 1 or 2 mace blows and a magic missile at this point. He's not doing great, but I described at the end of the round he had taken Asher down with his greatsword, and that he was kind of breathing heavily. And I described them as about to turn to the side to look over at Rowena, which is the last one standing. I'll explain why Gendry's not the last one standing in a moment. But because I described the action the previous round as Greaves not having turned his attention to Rowena yet, Rowena had initiative, and she cast, I forget the name of the spell, but it's basically like a minor illusion spell, and she cast an illusion of herself running away from Renwick into the forest. So when Greaves turned around, what he saw was the illusion. Now, I also told Rowena, if he sees 2 of you there, he's going to be suspicious. So I said, in addition to doing that, you're going to have to make like a dexterity roll to hide, right? So it's like cast and duck behind Renwick or whatever, to see if you can keep the ruse up. And she made the roll, and Greaves ran after the illusion into the wood. Okay, so we're left with Renwick, who had just been saved, Rowena standing over him, and 2 fallen comrades. Rowena ran to the closest of those comrades first to see if she can do something. But Asher was gonna die that round. And Rowena didn't have, it was the round that, or the round after, basically there was, or she went over and she failed the roll, or she went over and it would have been too late to make the roll anyway. It was one or the other. I don't remember exactly, but the point is that Rowena has 1 down comrade. Sorry, one comrade she's stabilized. That's Renwick. And Bernard and Asher are both about to expire. And we got to the point where they were going to expire on the same round. And I was like, Bernard, you have a 5% chance to survive this encounter. And Dan had been making death saves, or I forget what they call them here, but he had been making the saves round after round. He had several rounds and he failed them all. And on this last one, he rolled and he failed. He rolled a 17. I remember the number. And we lost Brother Bernard, right? We lost our Knight of St. Idris. He expired. And I turned to Mario and I'm like, Mario, unfortunately, you only have a 5% chance to survive this scenario too. And Mario rolled, and he rolled a natural 20. Asher comes up with 1 hit point. And with that, they both started, they basically, come on, let's go. And they both, Asher stumbling, goes over, grabs Renwick from under one arm. Rowena grabs him from another. They drag him into the wood away from the direction that Greaves ran, and they just try to hide. Now, unfortunately, the reason that Gendry was not involved in this scenario, which might have made a difference. Of course, he didn't have Cure Light or Cure Wounds, right? He couldn't do that because of his situation. But unfortunately, Adolfo was having technical issues that day, and he kept dropping in and out. And he really couldn't be present during the fight. And so he actually came back online right as the scenario was kind of winding down. And so we just explained, like, I mean, we had to be kind of cheesy about it. Like, he bumped his head when the wolves tore off. He kind of like stumbled back and bumped his head and knocked himself out or something like that. And then he woke up as he saw his other three friends running off into the woods. So he went after them. Right. It was our first character loss in the game. I know. I mean, this is a game that's pretty lethal, and it was sad to lose Bernard. It was really sad to lose Bernard. He 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 had a meaningful background and presence in the game. He had been, especially in that first session and part of the second one. Every time we were in Wardenwood, right? He was like this real human presence there, right? And of course, he had a sense of mission that drove not drove the game, but that was very much in tune with the main themes of the Gloaming as a setting, and the story as it was being told. So he was a really significant character, and I was really sad to see him go. But he died. I think it's on us as players and as game master to make that death meaningful, not by writing story around it, but just by the way that people react to it. Right. So speaking of death, we have not talked about Ursula. Mike was playing this session. We haven't talked about Ursula, and let me go to the bandit camp. Because what we did with Ursula, and this map was much more populated before, but after that fight, I turned to Mike and I'm like, Mike is the player, of course. I said, Mike, Ursula wakes up and she is tied to a giant gnarled tree that is in the middle of this kind of abandoned village that the bandits are using as kind of like a camp. And there were other tokens all over this map, right? The map had I had sentries and I on the map and bandits on the map, and kind of were saying where they were all kind of localized and all of that. There were bandits that were watching her. She was basically like tied to the tree root system and stuff like that. And I was like, what do you do? And she's kind of like, well, I'm going to kind of play dead while it's daylight, but when it gets dark, I'm going to kind of, become, I might do something. So, I'll just kind of like say what the situation was, because mostly what she did is that she just listened to the conversations that were happening, watched the movements happen. She saw Greaves Redthorn come back into camp angry. This would have been after he had fought the party. He saw him come in wounded and stuff and start giving orders for people to go out and search for the party. He had lieutenants of his that came up and he took them over to the big house over here, sort of towards the right of the screen in the back where I'm pinging right now, and all of that. And she basically just took note of all of this, but tried to play dead as much as possible. And I told her that I told Mike that Ursula noticed that there was some measure of fear that Greaves, people seemed afraid of Greaves's temperament, that they were on edge because they were afraid of how he was when he was in this kind of state, this kind of angry, kind of desperate state. So that went like that. Now, the situation that we had was this. I'm just going to kind of spill the beans in terms of like what's going on behind the scenes. And again, this is something that is in the situation that's written here in the Curse Scrolls #1. And that's that Greaves Redthorn was a knight of St. Idris, but he fell to worshiping a demon, and that he had taken over this bandit camp and was kind of running this bandit camp, but they were basically his minions. But he was using the bandits to protect the demon that he was nurturing and birthing out of this tree where the camp was. And while the demon was gestating in the tree, the bandits were meant to be its protectors. The bandits didn't know this, but that's what Greaves was doing. Is like they were the protectors of this demon spawn, right? But once the demon would be born, right, and it would emerge as a what's it called in here? It's a marrow fiend, right? Once this marrow fiend was given birth, that the bandits would serve as its food, right? And one of the things that Greaves was hoping, and one of the reasons that Ursula was not dead yet, was because he was hoping that, he was thinking, well, maybe I don't have to feed my bandits to this demon if I have other people that I can feed it instead, right? So maybe I can hold on to my bandits at least a little bit longer. And so the party was meant to be the food, and Ursula was kept alive. I mean, the bandit stabilized her and dragged her because he knew that or thought that Greaves might want to question her or something like that. That's why he stabilized her and brought her here. That's why she wasn't dead. But Greaves had this idea of having her be food. So she was tied to the tree. Now, in the adventure, it says that we're probably, I think, a couple of weeks away from the demon being born. But I decided to kind of steal a page from Mörkborg, right? And say that the demon is going to be born, and I'm going to roll essentially a doom die every day to see what night the demon would be born. And so we were now approaching night here, and I'm like, I'm going to roll a d20. If I roll a 1, the demon will be born today. Actually, it wasn't a d20. I think I rolled like a d12 or a d10 or something like that. I wanted there to be a bigger chance that it would be on this day. And guess what? I rolled a 1. So I'm like, oh my God, this thing is going to be birth like right now. So I started to describe to Mike how Ursula felt the tree, kind of like the tree roots kind of shifting and moving on their own accord. And there was this kind of like groaning and cracking and hiss that was kind of coming from the tree. And I had her roll kind of a wisdom check to see if she noticed this earlier rather than later. She noticed it pretty early in the process. So I'm like, what do you do? And she, fortunately, the rest of the camp was kind of on high alert because Greaves was saying, go out and search. And so they were focused kind of outwardly. The bandits were. They weren't focused on her at the tree because they were worried about appeasing Greaves and finding the rest of the party. So she was able to kind of, she wanted to make a strength roll to break her bonds, right? I'm like, all right, you're going to have to beat an 18. She's a fighter who has the advantage on strength rolls for making strength feats. She also has a high strength. She rolled really well. She rolled over a 20 and busted the bonds, which is always cool when a kind of like a fighter barbarian type of character does that. And then she slid down the root system and hid in the root system, which I described as kind of like writhing and stuff. And I'm like, are you going to go like through the root system? It looks like it's animated enough that you can actually maybe try to get through it to the other side, but it looks like it could be dangerous. Or you can try to flee kind of into the camp and hope that you can avoid being caught. And he made a stealth roll for Ursula, to stay hidden at least one more round before she was noticed. And at that point, the demon was born. And so Ursula got to see this marrow fiend break out of the tree and start just devouring bandits, right? And there was the chance, like Ursula was like, I don't have any weapons. I don't have any armor. Do I see my weapons and armor? I'm like, no, you don't. Are you going to try to arm yourself? Are you going to try to attack one of the bandits and take their stuff before you leave? Are you going to, and she's like, finally, it's like, no, I'm just going to flee. I'm just going to flee. And so Ursula made a few more kind of stealth checks, and was able to get to the north of the encampment and flee. And then, using her skills as a ranger, she was able to kind of like find her way back in the direction that she had originally come from and whatnot. So I made random encounter rolls for the other half part of the party that was making its way back to the road where they had, back to the encampment where they had originally met the fairies. And they wanted to kind of see if they can hide out there and heal. I made random encounter rolls. Along the way, they were lucky and they didn't face anything. I rolled random encounter rolls while they were on watch, and I rolled bandits. So it made sense for it to be bandits that were coming to find them, right? The ones that had been sent out by Greaves before the demon was born. I rolled how many, and it was only like one or two. I don't remember exactly. Let me see. I guess it was two or something like that. Let me see. It's 3d6 bandits when you roll in here. But maybe it was three. It was and I don't remember exactly what the number was. I thought it was a very low number. But I also thought, like, what are they going to try to do? And what I had the bandits do is they find them, locate where they are, and then they retreated to report back to Greaves, because these bandits had no idea what was happening at the tree, right? So they were going to go back and report. The heroes, the adventurers noticed them, but decided not to follow them, which in the end turns out to be kind of a wise choice. And then we had Ursula arrived at the camp, which she had built the camp, so she knew exactly where it was. It was kind of like a hidden, she had camouflaged it and stuff. So she stumbles the next morning when the rest of the party awakens and is healed and all of that. They see Ursula stumbling out of the woods and joining them at the camp. And then they had a debrief. They talked about how they'd lost. They told Ursula that they'd lost Bernard. One really nice touch I thought from Jason is that, Jason, again, he had been suspicious of Bernard the whole time because of the infernal thing. He wasn't sure what to think of that, but he also respected Bernard, and he had an affinity for Bernard. They both were worshippers of Ward, at least. Renwick wasn't sure how much that was a legitimate worship, or how earnest. He wasn't sure how earnest he was, but Jason said that, Renwick does something he had never done before, and that was offer a prayer for somebody else toward, in Ward's name, for somebody who'd fallen like him. And it was like this moment. Jason took this opportunity to have his character honor the legacy and the significance and the life of a fallen comrade, right? And I thought that was a really nice touch. So often in these kind of dungeon crawlers or things like that, life is cheap, people die, and people are like, well, where's the next one, right? Kind of thing. But it was nice that we had this moment of acknowledging Bernard in that way. And then at that point, the party decided to make it back to Wardenwood, and lick their wounds. I mean, they now knew that there was obviously Ursula filled them in on what happened in the camp, and they're like, whoa, this guy originally had 12 wolves. He didn't hold on to that, but now he's with a demon, and who knows if, he's like, we have to get out of here. We have to go and regroup. We got to warn Wardenwood. We got to think about what to do next. And so they head back to Wardenwood. I made the wandering monster rolls on the way back. They didn't face anything. Lucky for them. And they rejoined the community. And so Dan already made a new character. That character's name, let me see if I have her on here. I don't think I do yet. I don't know that I do. Maybe I do. Nixie is her name, and she is let me go back to the region map, so we can put her token big and proud there. So that's her. She is an elven ranger. She's from the north, an elven ranger, and we actually had a nice scene with her when the party got back to Wardenwood. She was in Gede's Hearth, and she was having an interaction with the children, with Alana's children, and it was I don't know, I thought it was a nice little charming kind of session where she was teaching one of the kids how to say certain things in Elven, and he was doing a good job, and you know her you know her almost musical laughter and all of this. So it was something very charming about the whole thing. But again, we were kind of wrapping up the session. It was a relatively short session, but it was time to go, and people were tired. So we'll get to actually have her integrate into the party next time, and we'll see where it goes from here. But you know, I reflected a little bit on this. This was it felt like there are obviously things that are left to do, but it felt like an end. Not one where the party was victorious. I mean, they set out to neutralize the bandits, I guess. And they kind of neutralized the bandits, or the bandits were neutralized for them. They discovered that there's a bigger threat out there, and they discovered there's a traitor to Bernard's order who killed their friend and is out there now with a demon. And I don't know that what they're gonna do. I know at the very end, while we were kind of doing the first scenes with Nixie, I know that Rowena and Asher and Renwick were talking about needing to maybe consult with people who knew more about this, and maybe trying to find some sort of witch or warlock or something that consorted with demons more, to see if they can get some information or some edge or something to be able to protect Wardenwood or hunt the demon or whatever. But again, I'm not sure what they're gonna do. They could just as easily decide that they're just gonna hope the demon doesn't come to Wardenwood and try to just do other things. I don't know what they're gonna do. But it was interesting because it was basically a failure. You know, they lost a character. They didn't retrieve any of their treasure. They didn't defeat the enemy. And they returned back to Wardenwood. And yet, to me anyway, there was something satisfying about it as kind of a moment to pause, if not to conclude the story of these characters, a moment to pause and reflect. And that's probably because of Bernard's death, right? It felt like a moment where the campaign is going to take a big shift because this character died. It's going to necessarily change the way the characters act because, or the things they do, because Bernard was the driving force, not of a story. I'm not trying to tell a specific story, but he had a mission, and his mission was to hunt down demons as part of his order, right? It's of all the characters. I mean, I think they all have that to some degree, but his is this, very focused, driving purpose. And I don't know. I mean, we may end up with that purpose still, but I think it'll be expressed differently. And so that's that. At one point, Dan, it was interesting because after the fact, Dan was like, "I was sad that he died," and this was like a week later or whatever. I'm like, he was like, I was sad that he died," and I'm like, "Yeah, I was too. It was sad to see your character die." And then he said, "I hope that this doesn't pose a problem for you." And I was like, "Well, a problem in what way?" And he said, "Well, because he was so important in terms of story. I'm hoping that there wasn't too much story that you'd attach to him, that now your campaign was going to be listing." And it's interesting because I've shifted the way that I game master really significantly certainly over the last 5 years, probably more like over the last 10 years, where aside from the times that I'm running some published 5e adventure or something like that has kind of a story, I don't write stories for games. I don't write plots. I write situations. And so, yes, it was sad to lose Bernard. Yes, the way the way that the campaign flows and the game flows and the direction, the choices are all going to change because of his loss. It's a meaningful loss. It means something to the game. But there is no story that is damaged by the death. In fact, Bernard's death is the story that we're telling, and then there'll be stories that weave out of that. And his death will be, hopefully, if we do this right, his death will be an important moment in whatever story emerges. But while I'm GMing in that way more and more and more with greater confidence and greater ease, I might say too, it's interesting because I don't think my players necessarily understand how that works. And it's okay. I'm hoping that they'll eventually realize it. But in the meantime, I think they enjoy it without maybe realizing why they enjoy it. Right? I don't know if that makes any sense, but you know, the reason I want them to understand that that's how this works, and I say it, but I just don't think it sinks in. The reason I want them to understand it is because they may feel more empowered to really define their characters' agendas on their characters' terms, right? That they can be proactive about things that their characters want rather than sitting and waiting for the module for the adventure to land in their lap. It's like, where's the hook? Where's the adventure hook? Where's the adventure hook? You know, and I the more I think about it, you know, I know when we opened up the second session, and they were just kind of not doing anything for a little bit until Renwick said, "All right, we've got something we have to do." If you recall, that's that play report. I think part of what was happening was that they were waiting for the hook to land. They were waiting for the person to walk into the tavern and say, "This is where you need to go." I'm like, no, there's plenty of information already out there. If your characters are interested in doing it, do it. If they're not, then do something else. But we're here to do something. So either start generating stuff on your own to kind of like create the next thing for you that you want, or look at the situation that exists, and if your characters care about it, then follow those things. And I, as game master in that second session, think I should have been a little bit more ready to just let them kind of, if they were going to do mundane things, and kind of like just go and let them do that. You know, who do they meet and what do those people like and what's going to develop out of that. But anyway, that's enough. Again, this is a temporary hold on the campaign. I think we're kind of at a somber pause moment now. We see the glimmers of possibilities, of new possibilities and new directions coming up. We didn't, I GM'd one more thing after this, which was a session of Into the Odd that was a one shot before I went on break. But I'm taking a little bit of a break from game mastering now because other people are going to be GMing. My wife is GMing a Ravenloft game this week, and I'm not sure, that might take several sessions. So I've got time to organize some games and think about what we're going to play next and all that. So I'll keep you guys posted. Again, thank you for making it to the end. If you did, as always, I wish you good health. I wish you good cheer, and I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.